Move! Let me tend her wound first. Then she'll choose.
Choose? She does not need to choose. She is chosen.
Ghostpine Ridge, Colorado Territory. December 1878. 3 men stood around one woman in the snow. Takoda knelt on the frozen ground, blood soaking through the buckskin wrap at her shoulder. Her eyes, startling blue against copper skin, stared forward without fear. Only a dangerous stillness. Nakoa, the Apache warrior, stood to her left. Blood dripped from his knife onto the white snow, each drop a crimson accusation. His voice came like thunder. "Stand up, Takoda. We leave. Now." Not an invitation. A command. Takoda didn't move. Nakoa stepped closer, knelt to meet her gaze. His face handsome, fierce, devastated. 15 years I waited for you. 15 years, and I find you here. He looked at the white man with murder in his eyes. With him, Takoda's voice came quiet, but unyielding. "You do not own me, Nakoa." He laughed a sound without joy. "I do not need to own you. You were mine the day your father placed your hand in mine. You were mine when our mothers sang the binding song." His fingers touched her face, gentle but possessive. "You are mine even now, even covered in his scent." Silas Mercer, the cowboy, stood to her right. He said nothing, just stepped forward, placing himself between Nakoa and Takoda. He didn't draw his gun, didn't threaten, simply stood a silent wall. Nakoa rose, face to face with the white man. "Move." Silas didn't budge. His voice came low, warm as slow-burning fire. "She's bleeding. Let me tend her wound first. Then she'll choose." Nakoa's lip curled. Choose? She does not need to choose. She is chosen. Silas still wouldn't look at him, only at Takoda. "Do you want me to move?" Takoda looked at him, then at Nakoa. Her lips trembled. "Don't. Stop." Both men froze. Colonel Garrison stepped from the shadows. His voice cut through the night cold as winter winds, soft as poison. How touching. The savage who thinks he owns her, the white man who thinks he saves her. He walked forward, knelt before Takoda, as Nakoa had done eye-level intimate. "But none of you asked what she wants." Garrison looked into her eyes with an expression that twisted something in Silas's gut. Recognition, longing, grief. "Do you know why I did not kill you, girl? Because you have your mother's eyes?" Takoda flinched. Garrison smiled a smile full of old wounds. "Ayana. She had eyes like emeralds in a copper face. Just like you." Silas spoke, his voice rough. "Who is Ayana Garrison?" Never looked away from Takoda. Her mother. "The woman I loved before your precious Senator Ashford stole her with his promises." The night held its breath. Garrison stood, his voice carrying across the frozen ridge. 26 years ago I asked for Ayana's hand. Her father agreed. We were to marry under the autumn moon. Then he came. William Ashford, with his fine clothes and his promises of peace. And she chose him. He turned to Takoda. 9 months later you were born, with his blue eyes and her copper skin. And he left her to raise you alone, left her to die in poverty while he built his empire. Takoda whispered you loved my mother. Garrison's laugh was broken glass. I loved her until the day she died, and I hated the man who abandoned her. That is why I am here, not to kill you, Takoda, to save you, to give you what your father never did justice. Nakoa's voice came like grinding stone. This man killed our people. Garrison turned on him. I killed the men who stood between her tribe and survival. Your elders were too proud to accept the treaty I offered. So yes, I removed them. Silas spoke, his voice cold for the first time. You're a murderer. Garrison's eyes found him. And you're a coward who ran from Sand Creek instead of stopping it. Silas went rigid. Oh yes, Mr. Mercer, I know who you are. The medic who resigned rather than face the truth. You cannot save everyone. Takoda stood, slow, deliberate, despite the blood running down her arm. Her voice didn't shout, didn't shake, just carried the weight of mountains. All of you, stop. 3 men fell silent. She looked at each in turn. To Nakoa, you say I am yours, but you were not there when they burned our village. You were hunting while I watched my father die. Nakoa's voice cracked. I came back. I searched for you for 6 months, and I did not wait. Because I am not the girl you left behind. To Garrison, you say you loved my mother. But love does not burn villages. Love does not kill children. I did what I had to. You did what your hate told you to do. Do not call it love. To Silas, and you ask nothing of me, which makes you the most dangerous of all. Silas looked surprised. Why? Her voice softened. Because I could love a man who asks nothing, and that terrifies me. 48 hours earlier, Blackwater Creek. Nakoa knelt beside blood in the snow. His fingers touched it, still warm. He followed the trail, heart pounding like war drums. He found her by the creek, but she wasn't treating a wound. She was washing a revolver. Takoda. She turned, eyes cold as the water. Don't come closer. He stopped. What happened? Who shot you? She looked at the gun in her hands. I did. The world tilted. You shot yourself. She nodded. Garrison's men were close. If they caught me alive, they would use me to destroy my father. So I chose. Better to die free than live as a weapon. Nakoa's hands shook. But you did not die. A sad smile touched her lips. The bullet missed my heart. The creek was too cold. I was too weak to try again. Nakoa dropped to his knees, gripped her hands with desperate possession. Then I will finish what you started. We die together, as we should have 15 years ago. He drew his knife, placed the blade in her palm. Cut my throat, then your own. We go to the ancestors as husband and wife. She looked at him for a long time, then pushed the knife away. No. His voice broke. Why? Because I have not finished living yet. Before we continue, comment number 1 below if you think she made the right choice. This gets darker. Hoofbeats. Nakoa stood shielding Takoda with his body. Silas appeared, rifle in hand, but not aimed. He looked at the blood. She needs a doctor. She needs nothing from you, white man. Silas didn't look at Nakoa, only at Takoda. Ma'am, I'm a medic. I can help. Her voice came weak. Why would you help me? Silas was silent for several heartbeats, then honest and low, because 10 years ago I didn't help people who looked like you, and I've regretted it every day since. Nakoa growled, Sand Creek. Silas nodded. I was there. Not during the massacre I arrived after. I saw what they did. He met Takoda's eyes. I cannot undo that, but I can stop you from bleeding to death today. Takoda looked at Nakoa. Let him help. Pain crossed Nakoa's face. You trust a white soldier over your own people. He is not a soldier anymore. And you, she touched his face. You love me too much to let me go. Even if I ask. Nakoa gripped her hand. I will never let you go. She smiled sadly. I know. That is why I cannot stay with you. Dogs barked in the distance. Garrison emerged with 4 mounted soldiers. Nakoa drew his knife. Silas raised his rifle. Garrison held up both hands. Gentlemen, I'm not here to fight. Then why are you here? Garrison looked at Takoda. To offer her a choice. He walked forward, unafraid of blade or bullet. Takoda, daughter of Ayanna, daughter of Senator William Ashford, I can give you 3 things. Legal land rights for your tribe. Justice for your father's murder. Revenge against the man who abandoned your mother. All you have to do is come to Denver with me. Stand before the court. Tell them who you are. And if I refuse, Garrison's smile turned cold. Then I kill everyone you love. Starting with him. He looked at Nakoa. Then him. At Silas. And finally your precious senator father. I'll expose him myself. Without you there to control the narrative. Silas stepped forward. She's not going anywhere with you. And who are you to decide, Mr. Mercer? Her protector, her lover, Silas, said nothing. Garrison turned to Nakoa. What about you, warrior? Will you let her throw away her tribe's future for pride? Nakoa's voice shook. She is my future. Then you're a fool. Takoda stood. Blood ran down her arm, but she didn't seem to notice. I will go to Denver. No, Nakoa started. Not because he commands. Because I choose. She faced Garrison. But not alone. Nakoa comes with me. Unacceptable. Then, kill me now, because I will not be paraded like a trophy without my people beside me. Garrison's jaw tightened. And him. She pointed at Silas. He is my witness. If you harm me, he reports to the territorial governor. Silas blinked. I am Takoda looked at him, her eyes soft for the first time. You said you wanted to help people like me. Here is your chance. Garrison laughed a dangerous sound. Very well. We leave at dawn. But know this, Takoda, Denver is 3 days away. Many things can happen in 3 days. People can fall. People can change their minds. People can disappear. He turned and vanished into the night. The three stood in silence. Nakoa's voice came hollow. You do not trust me to protect you alone. I trust you to die for me. But I need someone who will live for me. She looked at Silas. Can you do that? He nodded. Yes, ma'am. Day won the trail to DeVile's jaw. They rode through pine forests heavy with snow. Garrison and his men led. Takoda rode in the center, Nakoa on her left, Silas on her right. Like the wings of some strange bird that couldn't decide which direction to fly, Nakoa hadn't spoken since dawn. He rode close enough that his leg brushed Takoda's with every step the horses took, claiming her through proximity since she wouldn't accept his words. Silas rode at a respectful distance, but his eyes never left her. Not watching like a jailer, watching like a man who expected the sky to fall and wanted to catch it before it hit her. Takoda felt the weight of both attentions, different as fire and water. Around midday, they stopped to water the horses at a frozen stream. Garrison's men stayed mounted, rifles ready. Garrison himself approached Takoda as she knelt to drink. Your mother used to do that. Kneel at the water's edge. She said it showed respect to the creek spirits. Takoda didn't look up. Did you respect her spirits, Colonel, when you burned her village? His jaw tightened. I respected her, always, even when she chose him over me. Then why punish her people? Because they KNEW. Every elder, every warrior, they all knew Ashford abandoned her, knew he left her pregnant and penniless. And none of them told him to come back. None of them demanded he honor his promises. Garrison's voice dropped. So I gave them a choice. Accept my treaty, relocate peacefully, receive compensation, or fight. They chose pride over survival. Takoda finally looked up. You did not give them a choice. You gave them an ultimatum. There is a difference. Garrison smiled without warmth. In this world, girl, they are the same thing. Nakoa appeared at Takoda's side. Step away from her. Garrison didn't move. Or what warrior you'll spill more white blood. Make her situation even more impossible. Nakoa's hand went to his knife. Silas's voice cut through quiet but carrying weight. Colonel, the horses are watered. We should move on. Not a command, not a threat. Just a statement of fact. But something in his tone made Garrison pause. Of course, Mr. Mercer. Ever the peacekeeper. As Garrison walked away, Takoda touched Silas's arm. Thank you. For what? For not making me choose between stopping them and letting them fight. Silas looked at where Nakoa stood, glaring after Garrison. He would die for you. I know. Would you let him? Takoda was quiet for a long moment. I would try very hard not to need him too. That night they camped in a hollow between two ridges. Garrison posted guards. Ordered fires kept small. The message was clear. They were being hunted. Takoda sat apart from the others, rewrapping her shoulder wound with strips of cloth Silas had given her. The bleeding had stopped, but infection threatened. Nakoa appeared with a pouch of herbs. Let me. She started to refuse, then saw his face. This wasn't about possession. It was about the only way he knew how to love, through action, through care. She nodded. His hands were gentle as he unwrapped the bandage. When he saw the wound, a perfect circle punched through her shoulder, his breath caught. You meant to hit your heart. Yes, but you are right-handed, and you shot with your left. She looked away. My right hand was shaking too much. Nakoa's fingers trembled as he applied the herbal paste, an old Apache remedy their grandmothers had taught. The scent brought memories before the burning, before the running. Do you remember, he said quietly, the summer we were 12? When I taught you to swim in the canyon pool, you pushed me in. You needed to learn. I nearly drowned. But you did not. Because I was there. He tied off the new bandage. I am still here, Takoda. I will always be here. She touched his face. I know. But Nakoa, I am not the girl in that pool anymore. I am not drowning. I am choosing to swim in a different direction. Toward him, Nakoa's eyes went to where Silas sat by his own small fire, cleaning his rifle. Toward myself. Nakoa stood abruptly. Then I will follow, even if you swim toward the edge of the world. He walked away before she could respond. Silas appeared in the space Nakoa had left. He didn't sit, just stood, gave her a tin cup. Coffee, not good but warm. She took it grateful. You don't have to keep your distance, you know. I won't break. Silas settled cross-legged beside her, not too close. I know you won't break, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve space. They sat in silence, comfortable, the kind of quiet that didn't demand words. Finally, Takoda spoke at Sand Creek. What did you see? Silas was still for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Children, mostly. Some as young as 5. The soldiers. They didn't see them as children, just as future warriors, future threats. His hands clenched. I was ordered to finish the wounded. I refused. My commanding officer said I was a coward. Maybe I was. No, Takoda said firmly. A coward would have obeyed. Silas looked at her. I've spent 10 years wondering if I should have done more. Fought back. Stopped them. One man against a company, better to die trying than live knowing. Takoda set down her coffee, turned to face him fully. You are trying now. That counts. Something passed between them. Not the fierce heat of Nakoa's devotion. Something quieter, deeper, like roots growing slowly toward water. Garrison's voice shattered the moment touching. But we have a problem. He stood at the edge of their firelight. My scouts report riders, a dozen men, maybe more, following our trail. Nakoa appeared. Your enemies or ours, does it matter? They're between us and Denver. Silas stood. How far? Half a day. Moving fast. Takoda rose despite the pain in her shoulder. Then we move faster. Garrison shook his head. Not possible. Not with wounded. Not in this snow. Then what do you suggest? His eyes gleamed in the firelight. Devil's Jaw Canyon, 2 miles north. Defensible. Only one way in. Silas's voice came sharp. Only one way out, too. Exactly. We make a stand there. Let them come to us. Nakoa stepped forward. Or it is a trap. You lead us into the canyon. Your men wait inside. Kill us all. Garrison smiled. If I wanted you dead, warrior, I'd have done it already. Takoda looked at the 3 men, each one offering a different path. Garrison power through confrontation. Nakoa survival through tradition. Silas safety through caution. She closed her eyes, thought of her mother's teaching, when paths diverge, follow the one that frightens you most. Fear means growth. We go to the canyon. Devil's Jaw. The canyon entrance yawned like a wound in the earth. Sheer walls rose on either side, narrow enough that 2 horses could barely ride abreast. At the far end, a 1/4 mile in the passage opened into a wider space, and there, impossible, miraculous, a hot spring. Steam rose in ghostly columns. Ancient Apache pictographs covered the walls. This was sacred ground. Nakoa dismounted, knelt, touched his forehead to the stone. The ancestors' place. We should not be here. Takoda slid from her horse, moved to the spring. The water glowed faintly blue in the fading light. Mineral deposits, maybe, or something older. She removed her boots, stepped into the shallows. The heat sank into her bones, easing pain she hadn't realized she carried. It's beautiful. Nakoa stood. It is forbidden. Only the dying come here, to pass between worlds. Then it is fitting, Takoda said quietly, because part of me is dying, the part that belongs to the past. She looked at him. And part of me is being born, the part that chooses her own path. Nakoa's face twisted. And that path does not include me. That path includes all of you, but not as my owners, as my witnesses. Garrison's men had fanned out, taking defensive positions. The colonel himself stood at the canyon mouth, watching the trail they'd left. "They'll be here by dawn," he said, "whoever they are." Silas checked his ammunition. 12 rounds for his rifle, 6 for his revolver. Not enough, if this was a trap. But looking at Takoda, standing in that sacred spring firelight and steam making her seem like something from legend, he thought he'd face down 100 men if it kept her free. Night fell. The canyon walls trapped heat from the spring, making it almost warm despite the snow outside. Takoda sat on a smooth stone, let the steam curl around her. The wound in her shoulder had stopped aching. The water or the place itself seemed to be healing her. Nakoa approached, kept his distance. "Will you tell me one thing, yes? When you fired that bullet, did you hesitate?" Takoda thought back to that moment with the gun barrel pressed against her ribs, the squeeze of the trigger, the flash of pain and powder. "No." Nakoa nodded slowly. "Then you are braver than I am, because I could never, I know. That is the difference between us, Nakoa. You fight to live. I live to fight." He smiled sadly. "Your father, the one who raised you, he would be proud. Would he? He always said, 'A warrior's greatest weapon is choice.' You chose. Even when the choice was terrible." Takoda stood, walked to him, took his hands. "I will always honor what we were to each other. But I cannot be what you need me to be." "And what is that?" "The wife who returns to the old ways, who rebuilds what was burned." Nakoa's voice broke. "What if I do not need that? What if I only need you? Then you would be lying. To yourself and to me." She kissed his forehead, gentle, final. "Find someone who wants to rebuild with you, who sees that future as hope, not prison." She walked away before he could respond. Found Silas sitting apart, staring at the pictographs. "Can you read them?" He shook his head. "But I recognize some symbols. This one," he pointed, "means crossing. And this one, choice." "How do you know I had a friend?" "Apache translator. He taught me before everything. Is he alive?" No, they sat in silence. Then Silas spoke again. "What you said to Nakoa, about not being able to give him what he needs. Does that apply to all of us?" Takoda looked at him. "What do you need?" "Silas Mercer." He met her eyes. "Nothing you're not willing to give." And there it was, the difference. Nakoa loved her past. Garrison wanted to weaponize her present. But Silas, he just wanted to walk beside her into whatever future she chose. "I need time," she said, "to know who I am without someone telling me." "Then take it. You will wait. I'll do better than wait. I'll make sure you survive long enough to figure it out." She smiled, the first real smile in days. "That is all I ask." A gunshot cracked through the night. Everyone scrambled. Garrison shouted orders. His men took positions. From the canyon mouth riders appeared, but not soldiers, not bounty hunters. Apache warriors, 24 at least, led by a woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Nakoa gasped. Grandmother, the woman, elderly but straight-backed, rode forward. She looked at Takoda, at Nakoa, at Garrison, at Silas. When she spoke, her voice carried like wind through stones. "I have come for my granddaughter." Garrison stepped forward. "This woman is under my protection." The grandmother's laugh cut him short. "Your protection, Colonel Wade Garrison. I remember you. 26 years ago you came to our camp, begged for Ayana's hand. When she refused you, you left in shame. Now you return calling yourself protector. No, you are the wolf in shepherd's skin." She dismounted, walked straight to Takoda. "Child, your mother was my daughter. I have tracked you for 6 moons, since the burning." Takoda's voice shook. You survived. 12 of us survived. We hide in the northern mountains. We wait. We rebuild." She cupped Takoda's face. "And we wait for you, our last medicine woman, our last daughter of the line. Takoda looked at the warriors behind her grandmother. Young and old, men and women, not many, but alive, fighting. You want me to come with you. I want you to choose. As a woman of the line must, the grandmother stepped back. You can come north. Help us rebuild. Marry Nakoa, as was promised. Carry on our ways. She gestured to Garrison. You can go to Denver with the colonel, face your white father, use their laws against them. Then to Silas, or you can walk away from all of it. Find your own path with this man who asks nothing. Takoda looked at each option, each future. Nakoa tradition belonging purpose. Garrison justice revenge closure. Silas freedom unknown possibility. She closed her eyes, heard her mother's voice in memory. The bravest path is the one that serves the most hearts, not just your own. Takoda opened her eyes. I choose all of them. Everyone stared. Grandmother, I will come north, but not to stay, to learn, to train others in the medicine ways. Then I will leave again. She turned to Garrison. I will go to Denver. I will face my father, but not for your revenge, for justice. And when it is done, you will honor the treaty with my grandmother's people, to Silas and you. I do not know what I offer you, only that when this is finished, if you still wish to walk beside me, I would welcome it. To Nakoa, I cannot be your wife, but I can be your sister, your ally. Is that enough? Nakoa was silent for a long time. Then he knelt. It is more than I deserve, and less than I hoped, but it is honest. So yes. The grandmother smiled, spoken like a true daughter of the line. You split your heart 4 ways and still keep it whole. She looked at Garrison. You will honor your word, Colonel, or face not just me, but every Apache between here and Mexico. Garrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded, agreed. Denver, 3 weeks later. The territorial capital sprawled beneath gray December skies. 3 weeks of hard riding had brought them here through mountain passes, choked with snow across frozen rivers, past settlements that watched their strange party with suspicious eyes. A white man, an Apache woman, a colonel who spoke to neither. Now Takoda stood at the base of the Capitol building steps, looking up at marble columns that seemed designed to make a person feel small. Behind those columns, somewhere in that warren of power and paper, waited the man whose blood she carried, but whose name she could never claim. Silas touched her elbow. I can come with you. She shook her head. This I must do alone. He might refuse to see you. Then I will wait. I have waited 25 years. I can wait another day. But she didn't have to wait. Garrison had sent word ahead, not from kindness, from strategy. He wanted Ashford off balance when she walked through that door. The clerk led her down hallways, lined with portraits of stern white men who'd built this territory on treaties they never meant to keep. Her footsteps echoed. She wore her mother's doskin dress, cleaned and mended, wore her Apache heritage like armor. Let him see what he abandoned. Senator William Ashford's office occupied a corner of the 3rd floor. Through tall windows, Denver spread below like a promise someone forgot to keep. The room smelled of tobacco and old leather. Maps of the West covered one-wall territories carved and labeled as if the land had been empty before white men drew their lines. On another wall hung a portrait Ashford with his white wife, their 3 legitimate children arranged like proof of respectability. The children had his eyes, blue, like hers. Takoda stood before his desk. Silas waited in the hall as promised. Nakoa had returned north with grandmother, or so she'd thought. Garrison stood behind her, a silent witness. He'd insisted, said Ashford might try to deny everything without a white man present to verify. The senator sat bent over paperwork pens, scratching across documents. Gray touched his temples now. Lines creased his face. 25 years had passed since he'd held Ayana's hand and promised forever. He looked up, went pale as bone. The pen fell from his fingers, ink bleeding across whatever treaty or bill he'd been signing. My God, his voice cracked. Ayana Takoda stood perfectly still. Let him see his mistake. Let him feel the weight of what he'd left behind. No, she said, voice steady as stone. Her daughter, The words fell into the room like an executioner's blade. Ashford stood so fast his chair scraped backward. His hands found the desk edge, knuckles white. For a moment he looked like a man trying to remember how to breathe. How? Words failed him. She died 2 years ago. Takoda spoke each word carefully, giving them the weight they deserved. Alone. Poor. After raising me by herself for 23 years, I sent money. He started forward, hands reaching, then stopped, uncertain if he had the right to close that distance. To the wrong village. Takoda's voice carried no anger, just fact. Or perhaps to the right one, but to men who took it for themselves. It does not matter now. She did not receive it. We survived on what she could make with her hands. Baskets. Beadwork. Sometimes she sold her medicines to white settlers who would not look her in the eye. Ashford's face crumpled. I tried. I wanted my career. The party demanded yes. Takoda cut through his excuses like a knife through smoke. You chose. As we all must. She reached into the leather pouch at her belt, drew out the marriage certificate folded so many times the creases had worn soft. She placed it on his desk, with the same care someone might place a body in the ground. You married her. By her law. By the customs of her people. This document is witnessed by 2 white traders who were there. It will not hold up in your courts. But it is evidence that you knew what you did. Ashford unfolded the paper with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the words, some in English, some in the flowing script. The Spanish traders used some in Apache symbols that meant nothing to him, but everything to those who could read them. I remember this day. His voice came distant, hollow. It was autumn. The leaves were gold. Her father blessed us. We drank from the same cup. She wore flowers in her hair. She kept those flowers until they turned to dust. Takoda's voice remained steady, though her heart beat against her ribs like a trapped bird. She told me once that when she held them, she could still smell that day, could still believe you would come back. I wanted to. Ashford sank into his chair as if his legs could no longer hold him. God help me, I planned to. But then the party asked me to run for Senate. They said an Indian wife would destroy my chances. They said what they needed to say to make you choose power over love. And you did. Takoda stepped closer to the desk. Tell me, Senator, was it worth it? He looked at her then, really looked, saw the blue eyes that were his legacy, the copper skin that was Ayana's gift, the straight spine and fierce pride that came from surviving what should have broken her. What do you want? The question came out broken. Money, I have it. Land, I can arrange it. Your name, I cannot give you my name, you understand. But I do not want your money. Then what? Takoda pulled a second paper from her pouch. This one newer, written in Garrison's precise hand. She laid it beside the marriage certificate. I want you to use your power. Grant legal land rights to my grandmother's people, your wife's mother, Senator. 20 square miles in the northern mountains. Water rights, mineral rights, protection under federal law from forcible removal. Ashford stared at the document. You want me to create a territory for a handful of Apache, for 12 survivors, for the children who will come, for the future my mother believed in when she married you. Do you know what this will cost me politically? The mining interests alone will survive without those 20 miles. You have already taken millions of acres. Surely you can spare 20. Her voice hardened. Or do you value those rocks more than your wife's mother, more than your daughter's people? The word hung between them like smoke. Daughter. Ashford's eyes filled with tears. And in return, what do you ask? I will never speak your name. Never claim you publicly. Never stand before a newspaper and say, this man abandoned my mother. Never appear at your campaign rallies with my copper skin and his blue eyes, and destroy the future you chose over us. Garrison shifted behind her. This was the bargain he'd wanted. Ashford's shame weaponized. But Takoda was turning it into something else, something cleaner, justice without revenge. You would do that? Ashford's voice shook. After everything, Takoda smiled sadly, thought of her mother's words. Hatred is a stone you carry in your own hand. It weighs you down more than the one you mean to throw it at. My mother loved you, despite everything. despite the years alone, despite the poverty, despite dying without ever seeing your face again. That love gave me life. I will honor it by letting you keep yours." She leaned forward, placed her hands flat on his desk. "But hear me clearly, Senator. This is not forgiveness. This is transaction. You give my people protection. I give you silence. We are even, nothing more. And if I refuse," Garrison spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the room, "then I take her to every newspaper from here to Washington. Every rival of yours will know. Every voter who thinks you're a moral man will learn otherwise. Your career ends. Your family's name becomes mud." Ashford looked between them. The daughter he'd never known. The colonel who'd loved her mother before he had. "You are more merciful than I deserve," he finally said to Takoda. "Mercy is not for the deserving," she replied. "It is for the possible. And I choose to believe change is possible. Even for you." She straightened. "You have until tomorrow morning. Sign the documents or refuse. But decide. I will not wait 25 years for you again." Ashford pulled the papers toward him. "Read them slowly." Takoda watched his face, saw the war there. Ambition against conscience. Fear against love. Finally he looked up. "I will sign, on one condition. You are in no position to make conditions." "Not a condition. A request." His voice dropped. "Tell me about her. About Ayanna. About your life together." Takoda was silent. This she had not expected. "Why, because I have lived 25 years without knowing, and I find I cannot bear one more day of ignorance." So she told him how Ayanna taught her to weave baskets so tight they could hold water, how her mother sang Apache lullabies mixed with English words she'd learned from him, how they survived harsh winters and harsher judgments from both Apache and white alike. Told him how her mother never spoke ill of him, only said he had a choice to make. "We all do. I do not regret mine. You were worth every hardship." When she finished, Ashford wept openly. No longer a senator, just a man facing what he'd lost. "She was better than me." "Yes," Takoda agreed. "She was." He pulled out his pen, signed the documents with shaking hands, pressed his official seal into the wax, added a notary's mark. "It is done." Takoda took the papers, still warm from his touch. She folded them, carefully placed them back in her pouch. "There is one more thing." Ashford looked up wary. She reached into her dress, pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth, unwrapped it to reveal a simple turquoise stone on a leather cord. The same one Garrison had seen her mother wear. "She wanted you to have this back," she said. Takoda's voice wavered for the first time. She said, "If I ever found you to tell you she kept it close to her heart until the day she died, and that she did not regret loving you, even though you broke her heart. Because that broken heart gave her me." She placed the stone on his desk. "Keep it or throw it away. That choice is yours. As all your choices have been." She turned to leave. "Takoda." His voice stopped her at the door. "If you ever need anything, I will not ask you. We are strangers who share blood. Nothing more. But if you change your mind, I will not." She walked out. Garrison followed. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the end of something. In the hallway, Silas stood from where he'd been waiting. Saw her face. Didn't ask. Just offered his arm. They descended the marble steps into winter afternoon light. Garrison paused at the building's entrance. "You let him off easy." "No," Takoda said. "I let him live with what he did. That is the hardest sentence of all." She looked at the colonel. "You have your treaty. Protection for my people. Your part is done." Garrison's jaw tightened. "And what of justice for your father? The one who raised you, that justice was written in the documents. Land that will bear his name on the registry. People who will remember him. That is enough." Garrison nodded slowly. Something in his face eased. "Your mother would be proud. You did not know her well enough to say that." "No, but I knew her well enough to love her. And I see her fire in you." He tipped his hat, turned, and walked away. His part in her story was finished. Takoda and Silas descended the steps to where their horses waited. She expected to feel triumph, or relief, or closure. Instead, she felt only the weight of choice. She'd had the power to destroy a powerful man, chosen mercy instead. "Do you regret it?" Silas asked, as if reading